Okay, so I got this question from one of the students in class on Piazza, and I wanted to kind of address this, right? So they're talking about, so basically they're talking about the doing the special method of GT, and they're talking about this example in particular, and their main question was about the fact that other is listed here, right? And so you can see their question basically is other a reserved word? Does other mean anything, right? Then they talk about they did the exercise, felt like pulling stuff out of the air, right? All that stuff. So, let me see if I can't explain this stuff a little bit better. Okay, the short answer is no. Other is not a reserved word. In fact, self also isn't a reserved word, so we could really call these things anything. These are just function parameters, so really you could call them whatever you want. It's a style in Python that the first parameter to a method is called self. But again, it's not actually required. And certainly the other part here is not required either. So there's the short answer. Let me kind of show a further example just to try to take a look at, unpack some of this stuff a bit more. So here I have some code, and it's not using classes at all. Okay, so this isn't the way to do this. Generally, I mean, we have classes and all, so we should use those. But I want to use this, and then we'll sort of write the class-based or OO version of this, right? So if we didn't have classes, we could use just plain old Python dictionaries as a sort of poor man's class, right? And so, typically you'd probably do something like create some sort of constructor. So here I have some sort of function that creates the appropriate dictionary for us with the correct values and all of that. Now, some of you experienced Python programmers might look at this and say, hey, you should use name tuple and all that. Yeah, you're right. Name tuple would also be a way of solving this, but we're not going to get into that. Okay, so I have a simple function, right? We give for creating a sort of bank account, right? So to create a bank account, basically all it is, it's a dictionary. It has two fields, one field called name that stores basically the account holder's name, and then one called balance that stores the balance for the account, right? Now notice here, I'm not doing any kind of error checking or stuff like that, stuff that in production code I probably would want to do. So, I'd probably want to make sure that neither of these are none, that in the case of name, it's not the empty string, that in the case of balance, it's not negative. But again, I don't want to overly complicate this. All right, so that's how we create an account. Then there is a deposit method, right? So deposit function. We don't have objects here. We don't have a class here. These are all standalone functions, right? So to deposit something, I have to specify the account, which I've just called that. I've called it the account, but realistically, I could have called it ACK. I could have called it account, etc. I'm just going to leave it as the account for right now. So we specify the account. We also specify the amount of money that we want to deposit into the account, right? Now here, I do actually have a little bit of checking, right? So for instance, if we try to deposit into basically a none object, right? Basically there is not an account object was given, right? So if the account object is none, then I'm done. We just want to return. Or if the amount also is none, again, we don't do anything, we return. Or if the amount is negative, right? If it's less than 0, then again, also, we're just going to return. Right, so that's our little error checking there, right? Otherwise, and so I could write this in terms of an else, but given the return statement here, I don't actually need the else, because if that's true, then we end the function right here. If this stuff is false, then we're just going to continue on anyways, right? So that's just a little optimization there. So all we do is we go to the balance field and we add to that, right? If this syntax is a little confusing, I mean, I could have also written this out a little bit. Oops, sorry. I could have also written this like so. Okay, means the same thing. So there's that. And then I'm writing a greater than function, right? So greater than when we're comparing things, we're typically comparing two objects, right? So we're computing, we typically a lot of times, so again, if I open up the Python console here, right, I could do things like, I could say, is 3 greater than 5, right? And that's false. Is 5 greater than 3? Yes, it is. Okay. So when we look at it, typically when we have an operator, we have kind of a left-hand side and a right-hand side. So that's actually my abbreviations here. I have LHS for left-hand side, RHS for right-hand side, right? When we set it up as a function, we have this kind of what is referred to technically as prefix notation as opposed to infix notation. Right, that is. But anyways, right, so given that, basically we're just comparing the balances of the two objects. So we take the first object that we're given, that we've named LHS, and we look at its balance and we compare that to the right-hand side's balance. Again, if you're unhappy with LHS and RHS, again, we can change these. So for instance, I can come here, I can go to refactor and rename, and I could call it ACK1, right? And I have search and comments and strings set up so that way my documentation will also get changed, right? So I do a quick refactor there, and yes, it basically shows me what I'm going to do. I say, okay, fine, that's it, right? So there's ACK1, ACK1, ACK1. Notice it even changed it there. I could also similarly change it to change this one as well. So I could just do a rename, and then we could simply say, oh, that's going to be called ACK2, right? Again, these are just names of your parameters, so you can call them whatever it is that you want, right? Preferably, make sure you would like to have them be meaningful. So certainly ACK1 and ACK2 for short for account 1 and account 2. Okay, that works too, right? LHS and RHS is kind of a little nicer because, especially when we're thinking about something like greater than, you're trying to figure out, which is greater than which and all of that, right? But that gives you a basic idea of that. Let's try out this code, right? So I'm just going to go over to the Python console again. And the other thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to, so I have this little line here that's commented out, right? This isn't typical of what you would want to have inside a greater than method, but what it's going to do is it's going to show us actually what we're doing the comparison to. So it's going to say is whatever account 1 is greater than sign, and then whatever account 2 is, and then question mark, and then it actually will return the correct result. Okay, so for testing this out, all I'm going to do is say for account no classes, right? That's the name of this file. Import star, right? So I can do that, and now I can actually just make use of any of these things. So for instance, I could say Colin is equal to make account, and I'll give Colin that, and we'll say, okay, Colin has $300 in his account, right? And we can check this. Right, there's our fake or poor man's object, right? It's just a dictionary. There's the field name, right? There's the actual value, the field name, the actual value. Then I can create another one too. So let's say Layla, and again we're going to make account, and we'll just do Layla, and maybe let's say Layla is a saver, right? So there, she has a bunch more money in her account. Right? Then I can do things like I can deposit. So I could say, okay, deposit into Colin, let's say $20, right? And again, then I can check and see, oh yeah, we did actually add $20 into Colin's account. Okay, now let's try out greater than. So greater than, I can ask, is Colin's account, or basically the balance in Colin's account, greater than Layla's account, right? We can look. I mean, 320 is not greater than 15,000, so this should actually return false, right? And notice, it does in fact return false, and we have our little message that basically is Colin's account greater than Layla's account? No, it isn't, right? We can reverse that. So we could say, all right, is Layla's account bigger than Colin's account? Okay. Yes, it is, right? 15,000 is in fact greater than 320. Okay. So we're doing pretty good. All right. Let's take a look at converting this into a class and see what happens then. So I'll just create another file here. and I'll create a Python file. I'll call it account.py, right? And then let's create it. So class account, and then let's create our init method, right? And so for creating this, I want the person to specify the name, and I want them to specify the balance, right? Not unlike what we did with make account, right? With make account, we said there's the name and there's the balance, right? Now you might say, well, wait a minute, okay, what's this self thing? Okay, methods are called on a pre-existing object, right? Think of the deposit method here, right? When we call deposit, we had to specify the account. Why? Because we don't have classes here. So what we had to do is we defined a standalone function that will take the account. Now, when we create a method, the first parameter is going to be the object who the method is called on. Okay, so I can do something like I can say, okay, self dot, and then I can say name get set equal to name, and then I can say self dot balance get set to the initial balance, like so. Let's take a look at another one. So we can try writing deposit, right? So again, deposit, notice it's a method, so it's going to take the object that it's running on, and then we're going to take the balance, like so. Okay, and again, basically same kind of code that we had, that we basically had here. Might need to actually make a few changes, but that's fine, right? So again, this just becomes self. Actually, yeah, that should probably, that's better named as amount, right? And then here, instead of saying the account sub that, it's just self dot balance field is equal to self dot balance plus the amount. Okay, like so. So there it is, fairly straightforward. Now let's actually take a look at this, right? So again, make sure that's saved. I'm going to come over to here and say from account import star, right? And then I can again have kind of what we had previously. So I could have colon is equal to, right? And this basically simply becomes that, right? So set colon equal to an account where the name is colon and the balance is 300. Right. Now, one of the issues with this is, notice if I try to evaluate the colon object, I get that. Similarly, if I try to print colon, I'll also get this non-helpful kind of information. Right. So there are a couple of methods for doing this, special methods. One is the stir method, and basically this gets called whenever we try to convert the object into a string. So here, I'll just say, okay, let's return something like the following. I'll say account, I'll say, actually this, let's do, so-and-so's account with that much in it. Right, and then we'll use format and just say, okay, we're going to pass in the name, and we're going to pass in the balance. Right, so there's our string method. Now, having done that, okay, so there's a couple of things I have to do. Once I make changes to the code, if I'm using this kind of from account import stuff, the easiest way of basically making those changes appear, what you need to do to make those changes appear, is you're going to have to restart your Python console. So there I restarted. Now I'm just going to hit the up arrow to kind of go back to where I've imported that. Again, hit up arrow to do this. Right, now notice, when I try to evaluate colon, I still don't get the appropriate information. However, if I try to print colon, I do get the appropriate information. Now we can make the evaluation work as well. That's another special method called repr. Right? So the difference is the string method, typically you want something that's kind of meaningful for the user, right? So you notice I have something like this. In terms of the representation, basically I'm going to have a more concise response. So here I'll just do something like account where name is set to that and balance is set to this, right? And again, then we'll just use our formatting to put in self.name and self.balance, okay, like so. So this should basically allow that to work. Again, let me go ahead and reload. Create the account. And now if I evaluate the account, notice repr is called. If I print the account, we get the string method. Now, the main reason for these is just to kind of make our life easier in terms of testing, right? Repr, as well as printing out, converting to a string, and all those kinds of things. Now, here's the little thing that people don't tend to tell you, right? So again, self, right? So notice when to get some of these to happen, for instance, deposit's a good example, right? So if I go to colon, and now since it's a method, I call it on a particular object, right? So then with deposit, I ignore self, because what happens is with this, essentially what happens is colon is going to be that particular object, right? And I can prove that. I can say, okay, I could basically say running deposit on that format self. Okay. So let's try that. Again, we'll go ahead and reload. Do our import, create our object, and then let's deposit the same amount like we did before, right? And notice it says, yeah, we're running deposit on Colin's account, right? Why? Because Colin was the object that we called it on. That was self. Okay? Now, as I said, there's nothing actually special about self. Self is the preferred style for the first parameter to your methods. But there's actually nothing in Python requiring me to do that. So if I want to get kind of weird looks or comments back about changing my code in code reviews, I could actually do this. I could say, come over to here and I could say, let's rename this, right? And I don't know, let's call it me, right? So we do that. There, we've actually done our refactoring. And again, let's go ahead and make sure to reload this. Create the account, do a deposit, right? And notice, it still works just fine. Okay? But the self key, the self part is, again, that's an established style in Python. So you probably do really want to use the identifier self for the first parameter, right? So I'll change that back like so. Now, let's talk about the GT method. Okay, so again, we have self as the first parameter. Not unlike here, right? Greater than basically is going to take two parameters. So it is ultimately called on one thing, and then there's another object sent in. Now, by default, it uses other as the name of the parameter, but again, there's nothing requiring me to use the word other, right? So I could call it act2, for instance, and that would be fine as well, right? Now our code doesn't actually change very much. Again, I'm just going to copy this code over here into that. And then let's actually just fix this, right? So notice here now we're using self, and so we'll call it like so. This then becomes dot balance, and act2 dot balance, right? Basically because there's two balances. Why? Because there's going to be two objects. We're comparing one object to another object, right? And again, we'll see that from this print statement here. So again, if I go ahead and reload this, And let's go through our stuff. So we'll do our import, and we will create Colin, and then we'll create Layla. It's up there, but it's probably far enough back that I'd have to do way too many up arrows. So let's actually just do that, right? So again, there's Colin, there's Layla, right? And now, because of the special method, what I can actually do is I can say, is Colin greater than Layla, right? So this special method basically gives me what's known as operator overloading. What I'm saying is now I can use the greater than sign with account objects, right? So let's take a look. No, Colin's account is not greater than Layla's account because Colin's account has $300, Layla's account has $1,500, right? On the other hand, if we swap it around, yes, Layla's account with $15,000 is in fact greater than Colin's account with $300. Okay. So again, this notion of having other or whatnot, the name of the variable isn't important, right? The basic idea is that, greater than is going to be called with two different objects, right? So we have the thing on the left-hand side, we have the thing on the right-hand side, right? But since it's now a method of the account class, I do need to, typically we will name that first thing self, and then the other thing, then the second thing, well, whatever it is that you want. If you want to carry along that other, actually call this other, you're welcome to do so. Okay. But you don't have to. So hopefully that helps clear up some of the confusion about the use of other, and then kind of why we have the parameters that we do, right? I mean, the whole idea with parameters is that, we're going to add in the parameters that we feel are necessary for performing the particular task. Or in the case of something like greater than, I mean, there we have to have two parameters, right? We have to have the two objects that are going to be compared. Okay. So again, hopefully that kind of clears stuff up. If you're in my class, you still have questions, hit us up on Piazza. If you found this on YouTube, you can ask questions in the comments below.